Spy Cops Info Podcast, a series on the secret undercover political police who infiltrated over 1,000 campaign groups since 1968. Find us online at spycops.info. Episode 44. This is Radio Nick. Welcome to the Spy Cops Info Podcast. My name's Tom Fowler and I'm joined with
Donal O'Driscoll from the Undercover Research Group.
Okay, today we're going to be talking about Nicholas Edward Gratwick, not an undercover police officer, someone who back in October was found guilty of some really gross paedophilia, but also turned out was an informer for the police infiltrating animal rights and the environmental movement. Donal, you've been researching this in quite a lot of detail.
Well, I actually knew Radio Nick, as he was commonly known, since around 2001. Worked with him back in the day. And around about 2005, we started developing suspicions. Knew there was something not right relating to him. We researched, we got so far, we found out the company he was working for, but we weren't really able to confirm it. And since then, we've been keeping an eye on him, working out, other ways that could definitely prove it. We got a few leaps and bounds over the years that told us we were pretty much in the right direction and we had the right company. But it was only earlier this year that we got the definitive smoking gun. Maybe I should talk about actually the charges.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, he's been found guilty of possessing over 1,000 images of child pornography, but there's more than that.
There's way more than that. I think it's around 40 counts of extreme child abuse. I'm not going to go into what they are. You can find that online. I've read the charging sheet. It churns my stomach even now, just thinking about it. It's really, really gross. The fact that this guy was anywhere near us, let alone intertwined with people's lives, just makes my heart sink. It's foul. That's the only way to describe it.
Yeah, we talk about some fairly gross behaviour on the Spy Cops Info podcast, but I don't think we've had anything quite as disturbing and disgusting as this before.
Yes, and to avoid triggering people, I think that's pretty much all that should be said about what he did. If you really want to know, you can find it, but it's...
Yeah, we'll put a link to the Guardian article about him in the show notes. There's plenty more things out there about him. At the time of recording, he hasn't been sentenced yet. I imagine more details will come out once that happens. But the fact that he was doing this whilst also being an informer for police, it suggests a lot of things. Whether the police knew that he was doing this, whether this was part of the reason why he became an informer, there's a lot of things to get into. But let's start going through who he infiltrated, what he did.
Let's address that, because I think that's a useful overview to start with. So what we know from the court case was that his defence was that he was supposedly entrapping all these child abusers or child pornographers, and he was going to hand all this information over to the police. So he was relying on this defence, that he was actually doing us all a favour. And to justify that, he was saying, this is just continuation of my previous work. I've always been a police informer. So this is his defence, and there was what's called an agreement of facts, which is where I say, okay, you said this in your defence, we can agree with this. And one of the things the police came back and said we can agree with is that, yes, you were an informer from 1996 to 2003, targeting animal rights and environmentalists. So the police have admitted that he was one of their informers. That's the key point there. The rest of his stuff about infiltrating Al Qaeda, blah blah blah. They said no, you didn't have our permission to do that. You weren't doing that for us. This is just you trying to get away with it. So that's. But what we know from the charges is they only go back 3 years. We don't know how long this has been going on. People who know about this, who have this sort of behaviour and I've spoken to, said this doesn't come out of the blue. This has usually got a long-established pattern. And a lot of people have come out and said, oh, well, the police must have been using this to get him to inform. And I think that misses the point about Radio Nick. It's the other way around. Radio Nick is a fantasist who liked to play all sides. He was never on our side to start with. He went in to infiltrate our movements because he wanted to. He was doing it from the beginning. Where the fact that the police knew it was paedophilia We don't, at that point, we don't know. But we should let him off by saying, oh, you were somehow turned and the police were somehow using this. He went out to infiltrate us, and there's a bit we'll come on to which demonstrates that quite well.
We've talked about this in the past when we talked about the difference between informers and infiltrators, and that there is a big difference between those who are in movements and get turned, become grasses, and those who enter movements in order to pass information on.
Yeah. So he is a private intelligence agent, is the formal thing. He works for a private intelligence company trying to gather information. So he's got targets, he's got companies to sell to.
So should we start off by looking back through who he did infiltrate? He started off, it was the Newbury Bypass campaign.
Yes. So followers of the Spy Cop saga will no doubt have heard of the True Spy series. It was the first time we really learned about Special Demonstration Squad. The police come out to do this puff piece. How wonderful all these undercovers were. In the third episode, there's a bit where they talk about Newbury, and it's Sir Charles Pollard, one of the witnesses in the inquiry, who at that time was the head of Thames Valley Police. And he said, we had difficulties getting informers and undercovers into Newbury, so they came up with this idea of recruiting one of these intelligence agents to infiltrate. And this one was successful to a very, very high degree, did a lot of damage, and then went on to animal rights. So this is the first time we've really encountered the fact that there is this sort of behavior going on. They're sending in these private security agents. And in that series, they talk about it being a unique contract being drawn up between this agent and the police. So this is them really stepping into a new world.
One of the ways he got himself right in the centre of things, and why he got the nickname Radio Nick, was he passed around CB radios, got that sort of network working within the Newbury Bypass protests.
Yes, even more than that. He actually built the entire CB network for them. So he comes in and says, I got these skills. So to give listeners a bit of context, Newbury was a 9-mile-long protest. It was the whole length of the route. There were hundreds of camps all set up, each with their own nature, their own style, but they had to be all networked. And Radio Nick actually did a really great service by networking all those camps. It also gave him a reason to visit all those camps and to get a lot of knowledge, but initially it established his credibility. And having done that, he then gets put into joint quartermaster position. So he's really at the center of a lot of knowledge. So people are coming to him for, say, someone's got an action plan, they need equipment, they'll come to him to ask for the materials, or they might say, we need to buy some specialist material for our action. They would ask him. So he's starting to find out about what's going on, where things are at.
He's put himself right in the centre of things at Newbury and makes a lot of contacts in the movement there. For those who didn't live through that period, Newbury was the big environmental protest of the time. Pretty much any environmental direct action activist was connected to Newbury in some way. So if you were well known at Newbury, you were well known nationally.
Yes, and he was very well known at Newbury. And unfortunately, that allowed him to do a lot of damage. And one of the key things that he did was the tunnels. So at the time, tunnels was a new tactic developed by protesters to basically slow down the destruction of the forests and the building of the road. Basically, you had these huge networks underground, occupied by people. You couldn't run heavy machinery over it. You didn't know where they were. So basically caused the police to back off. They were really paranoid about it. So what Nick did was to betray them. And it's really nicely documented in the True Spy series, where they talk about how he tells the police not only where the location of the secret tunnels on Snellsmore Common are, but the timings when people are there and when there's only a few people there, and allows them to be in a situation, or we think he actually probably did this, we're watching it for when people who are guarding the tunnels who are coming out to go to the toilet, basically allowing them to be picked off, and the police then to do a raid to seize the opening of the tunnels, basically destroying months and months of work overnight. It was a major blow to the campaign. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it was a significant blow. So, he was doing damage on that level, and the police were so happy with that. And that was just one of a whole number of things that we're starting to learn about. There's other plans where people found a secret bunker or were about to occupy that, asked Nick for some equipment. Next minute, the police turned up and sort of filled the whole thing in. And he was going on many, many actions. And this is one of the key things I think about the difference between the police informer, undercover, and one of these agents. There's a lot more latitude. There's a lot less regulation. Like police, the number one golden rule for police undercovers is they're not allowed to be agent provocateurs. They have to limit themselves.
I mean, not that stopped some of them. But
it really didn't stop them, but it is the golden rule. There's a lot less latitude. It's a lot more relaxed when it comes to these agents. And what we've been learning over the last while is how much he was involved in many of the big actions. The digging up of Michael Hasseltine's garden as part of that. We think he was on that. Various other things going on, blockades, lock-ons, destruction in machinery. We think, he was in and around a lot of that. Now, these were happening sometimes with police presence, sometimes without, but he was involved.
His involvement at Newbury really was just the beginning of his infiltration of the environmental movement. He didn't stop there. I mean, he stayed at Newbury for the duration.
Yeah, he was there for about a year until the last of the trees were destroyed, but he was already building links into elsewhere by that stage.
Yeah, and then he moved on to one of the largest NGO environmental groups, Greenpeace.
Yeah, so in 1997 he moves to London. And his targets there there's two groups. There's Reclaim the Streets and Greenpeace. Initially, it seems that Greenpeace was his primary target, and he was using his technical experience to assist them. So we've located him in around the Rockall occupation. People remember that Greenpeace occupied the small rock of Rockall.
You'll get fuck all from Rockall.
Which is part of the Atlantic Frontier campaign when the British government was trying to open new oil resources in the Atlantic, and Greenpeace were campaigning against it. The stuff that they were doing around GMOs, genetically modified food, Greenpeace were doing actions in Liverpool where that GMO grain was coming in. We now know that Nick probably sabotaged one, maybe two of those actions. I spoke to somebody who said they were traveling up the M56, they got surrounded by police who knew all their names. It's like, it was clear they were under surveillance, and there was an inside source feeding information. Again, they didn't know who it was, but we can now, a very good chance it was Nick.
Yeah, so not just Greenpeace, but also Reclaim the Streets, which, for those who don't remember, was a very broad-based campaign. It started off against car culture, really those street parties, occupying roads, what became the classic carnival against capitalism thing of blocking a road and having a spontaneous protest that was also a bit of a party.
Yes, so he wasn't so deep in Reclaim the Streets, or he was not the core of Reclaim the Streets, but he was definitely in the periphery, and he was known within those circles and would get involved in various projects, usually, again, trading on his technical expertise.
People who were involved in Newbury were held in quite a high regard. If you'd been like a really useful person at Newbury who'd done a lot of stuff, that carried a bit of weight. So like his background from having been Radio Nick at Newbury opened a fair few doors and made him a trusted person in a lot of settings.
Yes, and it's maybe worth touching on his character. Like, he comes across as quite a bimbling, affable, nerdy bloke who's got this technical expertise. And when you look back on the history, he clearly does have the ability to do stuff. He's not stupid, but he was very lazy. He didn't follow through. Like, he would do enough to get himself in place, trade on that. But the follow through, there's a lot of people talking about, he had this reputation, but when I needed him, his help was minimal or late or insufficient. He was very careful not to do too much on that level. He was very, he could do it if he wanted to, but if he didn't have to, he didn't. It
just shows really his motivation. His motivation was to be trusted and to be at the centre of things. His motivation wasn't to actually get the job done.
Yeah.
That says it all, really.
So the main thing he did in Reclaim the Streets was an offshoot. It was called 100 Days to Kyoto. So the Kyoto Agreement was coming into place. There was the big meeting and people were organising around that, and there was a lot of organising around oil companies at the time and their role in climate change, which is only starting to be really explored at that time. And he became part of a group that was saying, okay, we need to be more than doing symbolic stuff, we need to be doing direct action stuff. So There's attempts to shut down the oil refinery at Corriton, which he helps scupper. There's other actions against the UK government ministers. They chase after the government minister for Department of Trade and Industry, trying to marry him as part of a symbolic action about how he was married to the oil industry, and Nick was providing the music and the sound. There was Costain AGM, which he was influential in getting people into. He taught people how to do. So he was still being involved, still the same pattern of helping facilitate stuff, but things kept happening. And the reason I think the anti-oil stuff is called, the organisation or the grouping went under the banner of the UK Oil Overthrow Association, was also a group targeted by Jim Boyling, we think. Right. So this is one of the first times we have a proper link with undercovers, and that's important later on.
As undercover police officer Jim Boyling, cover name Jim Sutton, who he'll be appearing at the undercover policing inquiry in 2026.
Okay, and he infiltrated Reclaim the Streets. That was his principal thing, and all these things will link back. But also around this time was Reclaim the Streets, and to a degree with Newbury and stuff, but particularly in this late 1990s, it's 97 to around 2000, 2002, that he's interested in Reclaim the Streets and Greenpeace, is he starts really bigging up another aspect of his persona, which is legal and financial knowledge. Right. So I mentioned the Costain action. It was like he helped facilitate people buying shares so that they could go to the Costain AGM. Costain were the people who were building the Newbury bypass, and they went to the AGM to ask questions, etc., etc. And he was providing people with knowledge, and it goes back to something we've learned about his earlier history, that he actually comes from quite a wealthy background.
Right.
He was a Lloyd's name.
Oh wow.
And in '92. When Lloyd's essentially finished its internal collapse and loads of people lost their assets, he was one of the names that lost their money. And he said in a newspaper account at the time, he lost around 200,000 plus the family business.
Oh, so he was from money.
Yeah. So, but he turns this around and says, because of that, because I lost all this money, I'm now anti-corporations. But I used to run this insurance brokerage, so I have all this knowledge about how the finance industry works. And I know how, because I was doing this campaign, I know about the law. And he really thought he was a lawyer. So he starts trading on this. This becomes his new, he's not doing so much radios anymore, but he is doing legal and financial stuff.
And that enters into a whole bunch of different avenues for him.
Yes. And it allowed him to facilitated his entry into animal rights.
This became one of the areas where he was the most active.
Yeah, so what we know from Sir Charles Pollard, I think, is that they were so happy with his work in Newbury, they redirected him to infiltrate animal rights. Now, he leaves out the 3-year gap where he's off at Greenpeace and Reclaim the Streets. But we do know in around 2001, he does turn up in animal rights. He just suddenly appears. Initially, he's targeting Shack, offering experience about how... So
Shack was the Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty, the campaign against Huntington Life Sciences, the vivisectors.
One of the biggest animal rights, if not the biggest animal rights campaign of its time. And he traded on his supposed knowledge of the finance industry, which was propping up Huntington Life Sciences, and using that to actually give campaigners a bit of an insight into what's going on. So that gave him a little foot in the door.
I mean, it's a great tactic. Following the money is, for activists, and it's really good advice and a successful way to go.
Yeah, and it was very useful. We won a lot of successes. But his main vehicle, once he got a foot in the door, was he joined London Animal Action, where he pretty much volunteered to drive very regularly. So London Animal Action had a minibus. It would go to demonstrations around the country. It was very, among them, demonstrations against Huntington Life Sciences. And he was very, very keen to drive. And because there's so few drivers in the movements, particularly in London, that was a welcome thing. So in that way, he uses a sort of a tactic we see with the undercovers. It's like, I can drive, I'll drive you everywhere. And he always seemed to have the free time to do that. So he got himself into a nice little position there.
Something which the movement has been short on is resources generally. Someone who comes along, like the CB radio's element was a kind of unusual thing, but the use of being able to drive people places, it's such a universal tactic they've all seem to have used.
And the other thing that he traded on was he became a key supplier of megaphones.
Right, yeah.
He was somehow able to source lots of megaphones, and he would resell them on to animal rights groups. Now, one of the reasons people fell out with him is they were shit. They kept on breaking. But, megaphones weren't that easy, so people were generally happy to get one, especially as they kept getting stolen by the police. So you didn't want to be spending a lot of money on a good megaphone, but the quality wasn't good.
Mm. Right.
No.
Yeah.
So what we know is around 2003, he stops being an informer for the police, and by this time he is he is almost exclusively animal rights, not entirely, but quite.
And quite deep into the movement.
Yeah, he was a familiar figure on the ground. If you were in London or at any of the meetings, you would see him at the national demos. You would often see him bimbling around. Rarely at the very centre of things, but usually around and about, he would be there.
And very well connected. So he stops being an informer for the police. Does he disappear from the movement?
No, because, and this is where we will take a step back, what we've learned since is all this link with the police was being facilitated by a company, let's say an individual called Steve McIntyre, a former Metropolitan Police officer. And he's the link between the police and Radio Nick. So going back to Newbury, what happens is the police and McIntyre draw up a contract between them to essentially sell Nick's services to the police. And this, from what we've heard, was unique at the time. This is a new innovation. Nick's name is protected. He doesn't appear in the contract, but he's getting paid for all their work. And according to True Spies, that money could be up to $1,000 a week. Really
good money, especially in the 90s.
Was really good money. And they said, well, compared to what policing costs were, that was worth it to them.
Yeah, this is something that's really often people kind of point to the deployment of undercover officers, the whole sort of covert approach of political policing, and say, oh, look, there's such wasted money. But look at what policing spends on its overt deployments. For a few grand a week here and there, it's not really doesn't add up to a hill of beans in comparison.
No. But he decides he's not getting enough money. And they decide to focus on commercial clients. And at the time, this was a really big thing. Animal rights was hitting some of the biggest companies in the world, not just in the UK, but globally. And those companies wanted intelligence, and he was in a position to sell some of that intelligence.
So in 2003, he stops working for the state and starts working for Big Pharma, basically.
Yes. And this has all been done by this stage through a company called Verify, based out of Reading. And yeah, it's a company run by Steve McIntyre, essentially reselling Nick's service. So Nick is never directly connected to the police, but it's always been passed through. But in 2003, they decide that they want more money. It's
interesting, isn't it? Because I think people think, oh yeah, there's corporate spies, but there's the police spies. That somehow the state is like the worst form of the infiltration. But the reality of the matter is, the cops couldn't afford the services of one of their trusted informers anymore because they'd gone private. It shows the way in which capitalism can beat the state, even at this kind of stuff.
Yes. Now, we don't know the full reasons for what I think, but our understanding it was basically money. And there's multiple other state private security agents in and around environmental and animal rights at the same time, and they're clearly getting very well paid for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's for people who don't realise. I mean, the amount of money that the environmental and animal rights movement were costing these companies was very, very significant. So no wonder they were willing to spend lots of money on anything to really try and stop that, really, and sabotage the social movements from achieving their goals.
Yeah, and also if he's not working for the police, he's got an ability to actually go even further.
Right, yeah. So where his handler might say to him, oh, no, don't do that, or don't go there. I can't imagine the pharmaceutical industry being too concerned about those kind of things.
No, this is don't see, don't tell.
Right. So what does he get up to then?
So he stays within animal rights, and I think there's a complex interweaving history here. So I apologize if I bounce back and forth a little bit, but you'll see how the picture fits together in the end. So in 2003, a lawyer, Timothy Lawson Cruttenden, took the Protection from Harassment Act and said, which was designed to stop people being stalked, and said, well, protest is stalking. The act now has got this criminal bite. So if you can take out a civil injunction, say, stop doing this behavior, and if you disobey, it becomes a criminal offense. And overnight, they were able to use, through the civil courts, a way of criminalizing protest. And the first one that came up was in 2003, Huntington Life Sciences versus Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty. Now, there were injunctions before then, but this was the first one that had that bite, where if you break this injunction. And it really threatened a lot of things. And, there was a big fight against these injunctions. There ended up being like almost 40 of them in the end. Mostly in animal rights, but also environmental ones. And this is part of where my bit of the story comes in, because I was one of the people defending and fighting those injunctions. I was a litigant in person, basically going, attack on freedom. We weren't getting very far, but we still had to fight. We still had to put up a bit of an effort. And, there was just a couple of us against vast multinationals. When you're up against GlaxoSmithKline and Novartis and Huntington Life Sciences and the 5 biggest Japanese pharmaceutical companies, you take what help you can get.
Sure, yeah. I mean, like David versus 5 Goliaths.
Yeah, it was brutal time. I'm not saying it was easy by a long shot. And Nick came in, and then you say, "Oh, but I've got all this legal expertise. I can help. I've been fighting court cases." At the point we weren't experienced enough to tell him to get lost. So he managed to start inserting himself into defences. He got to see all the documents we were doing.
Your legal professional privilege.
Our legal privilege was totally violated. Totally violated. He knew, when I was going into the court defense, he probably knew a large chunk of how I was going to do it and what the defense were at the time. He'd be sitting behind me in court, leafleting through the documents. He was even getting himself named in injunctions in order to speak. There's bits where he was actually addressing the court as a concerned person or something named. It wasn't just a passive watching. He was actively involving himself in the injunctions.
Wow.
It gets kind of worse than that. I wanted to pause there a second. In the Huntington Life Sciences, I think it was the Huntington Life Sciences injunction, he was going through the documents behind me, and he pulls out this intelligence report. That's from a company called Global Open.
Global Open. I've heard the name of that company before.
And this was the first time, as far as we can tell, that anybody had ever spotted Global Open as a company of interest.
Later on, Mark Kennedy, who used the cover name Mark Stone, the undercover police officer who infiltrated environmental groups in the Nottingham area and around the country, when he stopped being an undercover police officer because he didn't want to withdraw from the field, he went private, and he went private with Global Open.
Yes, and the question is, how did Global Open know to recruit him? Is another one. So, and Global Open was also founded by a guy called Rod Leeming, who was the head of the Animal Rights National Index, which was one of the organizations which later became the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, which employed Mark Kennedy. You start to see how all the circles are thing.
I mean, just really this world of covert policing and corporate espionage is a revolving door, right? It's a lot of the same people coming in and out, going from the state to the private sector.
Yes, and we'll actually see this in this Tranchard inquiry, that the real start of that happening. We'll just park that for the moment, because Global Open is going to come back into this. But he was also standing up and speaking in these things, and we're going, what you're saying is not helpful, mate. Right. At that time we're going, okay, you got the best intentions, but actually you're just rehashing things we've already lost on, and that's just irritating the judge. We're overwhelmed, we're just getting on with fighting. I get a message from somebody in London telling me that Nick is going and having drinks with Timothy Lawson Cruttenden. I'm like, okay, this is not cool.
That's really blatant.
So we ask him, why are you doing this? And he says, I've got a strategy to soften up the lawyer and you maybe get better terms or maybe get more information. And it's like, I know them. I've been working with against Timothy Lawson Cruttenden for for 2 years by that stage. It's like, no, this is nonsense. We didn't give you permission to do this. You're more likely to be giving stuff away than you are actually getting, and I'm not seeing any results, and you should have told us. I'm not happy with this. And then there's a couple of other weird incidents start happening. So he's been going on about Global Open, saying, you got to find the website, you got to find the website. And I go, why do I care about this company? But I get a phone call out of the blue from the Evening Standard going, hey, we're running a story on Global Open. We're trying to track down the website. Can you help with this? And I thought, how did you get my number? Oh, from a source. I was like, this is really weird. 20 minutes after that phone call, I get a phone call from Radio Nick, which is almost exactly the same. I was like, Nick is the source for this stuff. Why is he talking? How has he got contacts into the Evening Standard? We would kill for those sort of contacts. A friend of ours, he sets up in the pub with, so come to pub. Oh, this is my friend. It turns out this friend was a journalist who does a hatchet job on her. Okay, we're really not happy with what you're doing now. So suspicions are within our small circle within Animal Rights was like, there's something not right. And somebody put me in contact with somebody. I can't go into the details because it's all confidential. And they basically said to me, yes, Nick is working for Verify. And we hadn't heard the name Verify before this stage. This was the first time we learned the name Verify. And they're having a turf war with this company, Global Open, over animal rights. Basically, who gets to do the most reports and sell it. They're in competition with each other. But this person can't come forward because of the nature of how they had ended up with that intelligence. Essentially, it's a whistleblower. And I was like, oh, okay. This matches all the sort of weird stuff that we've been experiencing with him, but we started investigating. We found Verify. We found that they were linked into a bigger network of companies called Risk International, who also employed a number of officers who were involved in the Stephen Lawrence police corruption. So I don't even want to go there, but there's a network of corruption which touches on us. But we couldn't link Verify and Radio Nick directly. We just had this source saying this isn't where you need to look. But we knew that he was dodgy by this stage. So we told those we could, and not everybody believed us, but people did. And he basically starts getting pushed out of Animal Rights. At the same time, he's doing other things. He's basically almost bankrupting somebody through their actions. He's messing around with the London Animal Action minibus, doing things. He's doing lots of little things that cause people to lose trust in him. So in 2005, he's pretty much edged out of all animal rights groups, with the exception of Speak, the campaign in Oxford. Who weren't fully convinced at that point, but enough of us going, we're not working with them. Just go away. He apparently was very upset and said, "It should just come to me." And in 2006, when Speak is under a lot of repression, they were running the campaign against the Animal Lab at Oxford University, which was a massive campaign, but also in response to a huge police repression.
Yeah.
It was really harsh. And Oxford University had also taken out an injunction. And again, we'll come back to that injunction. But in 2006, Nick managed to work himself in a position where he was negotiating with Oxford Police, or Thames Valley Police, which is the parent force, the route of a Speak march. And he basically caved to all the police requests. People just went, what's going on here? It's like, you want us to march down one back street and that to be a national march? No, we're renegotiating the march. He was very angry, but other people said, no, this is not good enough. And they went to the police and basically undermined him, and he got really irritated. And it's clear there was something going on. So at that point, Speak said, don't know what you're doing, but you don't do that. So he leaves that campaign as well. In 2007, there's the Oxford injunction still ongoing. They changed lawyers from Timothy Lawson Cruttenden to another firm called Simmons & Simmons, big London firm, one of the big London firms. And they do some new disclosure. And out of that disclosure is an intelligence report. And we don't know who it's from, it's redacted. but it's a profile of animal rights activists in Speak and Shack. There's a few bunches, and I'm one of them. And says a bunch of derogatory things about me, makes some really wild claims like I'm the chairman of the Northern ALF Council, which I didn't even know there was a council, let alone elected to be head of.
Yeah.
And, various just slander. But there's a line in it that says, thinking of a learning accountancy in order to better be able to weaken Huntington Life Sciences. And, well, that's weird, because I've only ever said that to Radio Nick. It was a throwaway line at our first gathering when I was feeling sorry for him and I'd gone to sit and chat with him.
Right.
I wouldn't have sat with him if I'd known what he was.
Yeah.
But the reason I know it's a joke in the thing is because I'm actually dyscalculate. I struggle with numbers, actual numbers. I thought, I would never have done this. But here it is in a report where I've made a joke, not a terribly funny joke, but as a joke statement, as a serious comment. But I know I'd only said that to one person, Nick. Nick's the person supplying the material in this report. Oh, it was Lawson Cruttenden, was the lawyer before this disclosure. So it's like, you bastard.
Right, yeah.
I'm starting to build up a picture. But fortunately, by that stage, he's gone. He's gone from the movement, and we don't really see him again. Like, he maintains contact with some people from his Newbury days, and there's a whole set of other stories to come out there. Not my story to tell. I will leave that to other people.
I'm worth stressing, really, that before the exposure of the undercover police officers in 2010, the idea of exposing somebody as an informer culturally was very different. It wasn't like you go, oh, we pretty much think this guy's an informer, and then everybody accepted it. It was still very sort of contested. Even a lot of people didn't even believe such things existed.
Yes, and because people were very rightly saying, everybody gets accused of being an informer, everybody gets fingers pointed, where's your evidence? And the problem we had was one of our key sources wasn't prepared to come forward. So we're left going, everything points, but we don't have the smoking gun. And I don't, there will be people out there going, oh, they should have got rid of him straight away. And it's like, no, we didn't have evidence. And if we were to take that route, as you say, there'd be nobody left in the movement. Because people make those allegations far, far too easily. You should only make those allegations when you have solidly confirmed. And one of the reasons we're only really speaking publicly about this now is because we have that smoking gun beyond reasonable doubt. But just because not everybody believed and we didn't have the smoking gun meant that we stopped there. We kept an eye out for him. I mean, the name was always like, is Nick there? Is Nick there? And with the spy material coming out in the Spy Cops scandal, we said, well, is there connections there? Can we use this to find that smoking gun? And one of the key moments was 2014. I was chatting to somebody who had just been speaking to Rosa, who was the woman deceived, one of the women deceived by Jim Boyling. Remember him? And again, Rosa's story is horrific, and I'm not going to, it's a story for her to tell, which we will hear in the next phase, hopefully. But she was with Boyling the night that True Spies was televised.
Right.
And he saw the bit where Charles Pollard is speaking about Newbury and goes, that's Radio Nick. And she went, who's Radio Nick? I don't know who he is. They hadn't crossed over sufficient for her to remember the name, but she did remember the name. And she remembered that Boyling was in receipt of intelligence reports as an SDS officer from these private firms. And, there was a work out who the intelligence was coming from. So he knew Radio Nick was. And also, Boyling had been in the same group campaigning against the oil refining, and had been scuppering those actions. Like, there's an action at Deptford Bridge where they tried to occupy Deptford Bridge, which he probably was the one that caused the police presence to turn up and stop it happening. This was also one of the key moments. Like, okay, it's getting confirmed in multiple directions. Okay, we're starting to move forward. And we start really interviewing lots of people across all the movements that we know he was in, building up the bigger picture. And we started to go back to verify. So who is this company? Can we actually pin this down? And then suddenly, out of the blue, because we had done our homework previously, we started finding the links. So Stephen McIntyre's son was a company director with Radio Nick of another company. His wife was the director of another company with Radio Nick. It's like, we've now got the links. We can now sort of say, yes, it is verified. We can show that you actually know. And it's since turned out they've had a 35-year working relationship.
Jeez.
So we don't know what Nick has been doing for a lot of that time. We know that they were very close, that Nick and Steve McIntyre were very close just in our time. There's a lot of questions that have still been answered, but we've closed that circle. And actually, in the court case, I've been told that Nick references Steve. Sometimes, and talks about him as being a handler.
Right.
So, we've finally closed the whole circle, and it was basically Nick relying on this period of his life to justify his supposed work trapping pedophiles. Gave us the smoking gun, but we can see now where all the different aspects join up. This complex jigsaw we've had.
Yeah,
the picture is completed.
It's a hell of a story. The way that he's ended up being thrust in the public eye with his horrific behaviour and thankfully now convictions exposed this huge deployment of career of his of deception. You've said that all these convictions, they only relate to the last 3 years. There's plenty of times where he was in situations where he was in circle of trust for a lot of activists.
Yeah. Yes, there's a lot of questions to be asked. And you'll not hear me say this often, but I think there needs to be an inquiry. I think there needs to be a proper investigation about how much the police knew about his behaviour and when they knew. When did they start investigating him for paedophilia? How much of this was known by Thames Valley Police at the time? How much? And it's not just the paedophilia; it's what he was doing, and there's other things about his. We know he had a relationship at Newbury, a sexual relationship. We know that he was very close to young, vulnerable women. Now, there's no allegations that he abused them in any way, but they're now having to deal with the fact that somebody they thought was a close friend, was an extreme paedophile, as well as being an informer. It's like it's a double whammy. So, in the midst of all the spy cop stuff, I'm afraid we do actually need to look at this other aspect and the abuses that sit in and around that.
Yeah, we've often said that the undercover police officers were really the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the dirty tactics of the state and corporations in undermining and discrediting and destroying social movements. But yeah, corporate spies, it's a huge area, right? There's a lot of them. We talk about it's about informers, but we've heard through the inquiry of the MICE, this acronym they use for how you get informers: money, ideology, compromise, ego. It seems like Radio Nick had 3 of those. It was a lot about money. He certainly had a big ego, but there was plenty they could compromise him on. Now, which one they were actually using for him is really open for question.
From having met him and having worked with him and having spent a time speaking to quite a lot of people, I think I interviewed over 100 people in the end for the report that we're about to release. I think he fits into a particular category of fantasist, but also somebody who enjoyed playing the sides. There's been a couple of informers for whom that's been a key motivation. The money is definitely helping. They like the money. But what they seem to really like is having that bit of knowledge that you don't, and that is that they're betraying you, and they're playing games with the police as well. They like that game, and my suspicion is that Nick is one of those people who liked feeling superior and better because he was playing this double game, and the game was part of what he enjoyed.
Yeah, it's the ego. Yeah. You mentioned you've been writing a report. It's pretty extensive. It will be in the show note. It may be that you were someone who knew Radio Nick. Perhaps you were someone Donal's already spoken to. But if you weren't, are you still looking to speak to people about him? Yes.
The more we can cooperate, the more we can build up pictures. One of the key things we want to do is get stuff ready for the inquiry. We talked about Jim Boyling. There's other overlaps with undercover policing. I want to basically say, it's like, this isn't in isolation. You are contacted. How much do the undercovers know? What were the links? So it's been a classic investigation where one person's comment has corroborated another and allowed us to actually jump forward. So, and also we're talking about events up to 30 years ago. So the more people who can corroborate he was on particular actions, the better. It allows us to have a clearer picture. But also we're very aware that a lot of people are quite distressed by this. The fact that he was even in and around people is disturbing enough, because people have all sorts of own personal history. So like what we say to people is don't assume, make any assumptions about people's reactions. You don't know what's in their own personal history, that this is actually going to be really quite triggering. So we ask people to be careful about that. And certainly one thing we want to avoid is the whole, we all knew he was an informer back in the day. In this case, what did you do about it? I'm sorry, but we got to be clear that no recriminations, take care of people, come together, talk about it, and look after each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really, it bears repeating again and again. It's something that we get a lot when we're talking about undercover officers, that people go, oh yeah, we always knew. And it's like, no, you didn't. No, you really didn't, because if you had, you'd have done something about it. You may have had suspicions, but you also had suspicions about plenty of people who weren't, and it's really important that we don't go around just like going, oh, well, I knew, well, why didn't you say? And looking at like, it's an incredibly traumatic thing for so many people to discover that they were so close to someone so abhorrent in so many ways in this case. I mean, Jesus. The way that we interact with each other about this, now we found out, is really important as well.
Yes. Yeah. We haven't got a support group together yet. There's something we're thinking about. If people are interested in or already forming those groups, then I think a wider conversation needs to be held.
Yeah. And where should people get in contact with you?
Contact me through the Undercover Research Group, donal@undercoverresearch.net.
Yeah, great. Sometimes I think that the stuff we work on is looking at the worst people in the world. I think definitely Radio Nick is one of the worst people in the world. Absolutely fucking appalling. Thanks for listening. We'll be back talking about more of the worst people in the world fairly soon. We're not doing so many podcast episodes at the moment because the undercover policing inquiry is ongoing and we're doing rolling coverage of that. You can find all that coverage on social media with the hashtag SpyCops. If you check out the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance YouTube channel, you'll see all the videos that are being uploaded every day, really, of reactions 4 or 5 times a day. Please follow that closely if you're able to and share it with your friends. New episodes of the podcast will be coming out soon. You can hear all the old ones at spycops.info. Anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you're able to give us a 5-star review on your preferred podcasting platform, please do. It makes a huge difference, any kind of reviews. If you're able to support our work, you can go to ko-fi.com/Tom B. Fowler and give us a donation. Cheers.
Bye.